Welcome back to part 2 of Ollie Knits does an unsupervised, unhinged deep dive into cotton. In part 1, we looked quite specifically at cotton as a yarn in terms of its behaviors, its characteristics, and the general consensus online. We ended off with how it's produced and how it makes its way into our stash or onto our needles. In part 2, we will be speaking about cotton in a much grander scheme. We're going to be covering the ancient origins, and there's a lot to talk about there. But before we get there, I just want to take a quick stop in the comment section of part 1 because you guys brought up a few really interesting points. I just thought I was going to make a deep dive on cotton. I started filming it and realized I had a docu-series going on. I uploaded part 1 and the comment section turned into a fascinating discussion about why cotton has such mixed feelings amongst knitters. Something I noticed is that you guys weren't really disagreeing with each other. If anything, you were all sort of saying the same thing. You were just talking about completely different cottons. Some people were discussing sturdy cottons used for dishcloths or pot holders. Others were talking about silky mercerized cotton. A bunch of you shared your favorite blends like silk cotton and cotton linen. There was one viewer who pointed out that her favorite sweater of 10 years, she loved it so much and she never understood why she loved it, and the video helped her understand that it was cotton's beautiful drape. Another viewer suggested that most people are introduced to cotton through yarns designed for household items and not for garments. And I feel like that explains a lot. Because honestly, saying I don't like cotton is kind of like saying I don't like cheese. There is a huge category. A blue cheese and a ricotta cheese are both technically cheeses, but the experience is somewhat different. And cotton is much the same. While a thick knit kitchen towel and a light cotton summer top both contain cotton, they don't necessarily behave like the same material at all. Then there was another theme that came up a lot, and that was a conversation around climates. Several viewers living in hot or subtropical regions pointed out that plant fibers make up a huge chunk of their knitted wardrobe, while viewers living in colder climates understandably have a very different relationship with perhaps wool. And this conversation is important because fibers don't exist in isolation. They're a part of your lifestyle, your climate, your culture, your wardrobe. The perfect fiber for a, say, Canadian summer is not necessarily the same fiber for a Florida summer. And then one of my favorite comments of all of them was someone describing cotton as wearing many masks. The more I thought about that phrase, the more I realized it perfectly captures the problem. When knitters talk about cotton, they're talking about it like it's a single fiber with a single personality. But cotton has spent thousands and thousands of years developing into countless different yarns, constructions, blends, and having different finishes. We can't really understand why cotton wears so many different masks until we understand why humans have been tinkering with it for so long. Chapter 4, Ancient Origins. So after reading all of those comments, I find myself wondering something. If cotton can inspire so many opinions today, how long have humans actually been arguing about it? Because one of the most surprising things that I discovered while doing all this research is that cotton isn't a relatively modern fiber at all. I mean, that's not news, but it's not even old. Cotton is ancient. We're talking the kind of ancient that makes medieval history look like it wasn't that long ago. Long before knitting and industrial mills existed. Long before fashion magazines, fiber festivals, and people arguing about it on the internet. Humans were already growing cotton, spinning it, weaving it, and building entire textile traditions around it. In fact, by the time most of Europe was still pretty much trying to figure out what to do with wool, cotton had already been cultivated, woven, traded, and refined into multiple parts of the world. Essentially, humans have had a very, very long time experimenting with it, a very long time trying to improve it. and an exceptionally long time being a little bit obsessed with it. So let's rewind the clock. Not just a few centuries, not even thousands of years, but several thousands of years. Back to the beginning of humanity's relationship with one of the most successful fibers ever discovered. In most of video 1, we looked at cotton through a microscope. In this video, I would like to zoom out, very, very far out, because long before cotton became yarn, a t-shirt, a knitting podcast, it was simply a wild plant growing in different parts of the world. And one of the most remarkable things about cotton is it doesn't appear to have a single origin point. Instead, different civilizations discovered its potential independently, thousands of years apart, and on different continents, without knowing that they were all doing the same thing. In what is now Mexico, ancient people started domesticating their local variant of cotton. Meanwhile, in other parts of South America, civilizations in modern-day Peru were pretty much doing exactly the same thing. And over the Indus Valley, in what essentially is Pakistan and northwest India, another cotton tradition was beginning to emerge. It's one of those patterns in history that I find endlessly fascinating, where civilizations are independently kind of doing the same thing without knowing it, completely separated by geography, culture, and language. We all looked at the same fluffy seed pod and pretty much came to the same conclusion. We could make something useful out of this. By around 3000 BCE, the people in the Indus Valley had pretty much become masters of cotton. They transformed it into textiles that were impressive enough to wow historians today. And in Asia, while the rest of the world was still very much heavily reliant on wool and linen and leather, cotton was already becoming a very important part of everyday life in South Asia. And then, as so often happens in textile stories, trade entered the picture. Merchants carried cotton fabrics across continents, with ideas traveling alongside goods. Techniques were exchanged from one culture to another. And around about the 8th century, Arab traders were introducing cotton textiles to parts of southern Europe. In fact, the English word cotton comes from an Arabic word pronounced kutan, a tiny little linguistic souvenir from the trading days. By the 17th century, Indian cotton textiles had become one of the most sought-after fabrics in the world. European consumers couldn't get enough of it. The colors were so vivid and the fabrics were so lightweight. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. And eventually, ships belonging to trading companies such as the East India Company were carrying vast amount of Indian cotton and distributing them all around the globe. At this point, cotton was no longer a plant. It was becoming a global phenomenon. And as we're about to discover, that success was about to change the course of history in ways no one would really have ever been able to have imagined. Chapter 5. Cotton goes global. Then the Industrial Revolution arrived and changed everything. Almost overnight, the world developed an insatiable appetite for cotton. In Britain, new textile inventions were transforming the industry. Machines such as the spinning jenny and the power loom dramatically increased the speed at which cotton fabric could now be produced. Factories expanded, production soared, and cotton became the spine behind a rapidly industrializing world. Then, in 1793, another invention accelerated this process even further, the cotton gin. Now, despite that name, I'm not talking about a cocktail or some sort of malefic spirit. It was a machine designed to solve a very specific problem. Cotton fibers grow around sticky little seeds, and separating the two was painfully hard work. The cotton gin could do that job dramatically faster, pulling the fibers through a sort of a grate while leaving all the little seeds behind. What once took 10 hours or maybe even days could now be done in an hour or two. And while that might sound like a simple and harmless improvement, the consequences were enormous. because while cotton was already profitable, it now could be even more. More land was planting it, more cotton needed to be harvested, and it could still sound like it's a story of innovation, and in many ways it was, but it's also a story about people. Because factories couldn't run on inventions alone. They needed the raw materials, and someone had to grow them. Someone had to harvest them. And by the 19th century, vast cotton plantations expanded all across America's South. And this is where the conversation takes a bit of a darker turn, because this is when humanity implemented slavery. The work that needed to be done was performed by enslaved men, women, and children. Families that had been forcibly taken from their homes. They were stripped of their freedom, and they were forced to feed a system that was generating enormous wealth. As the world started developing even more interest in cotton, more and more people were being brought into this horrific system. The fortunes that were being built off the back of cotton, they were feeding businesses, banks, shipping networks, industries on both sides of the Atlantic. This fiber became so economically important, it was referred to as King Cotton. I'm going to let that sit for a second. But behind that wealth was millions of human lives. Families and communities completely destroyed. Generations of families forced to endure unimaginable hardships so that cotton could be grown, harvested, and shipped all around the world at an alarming rate. And I think this is an important moment to pause, because when we're talking about textiles, it's very easy to focus on fibers, finished garments, the fabric. But more often, textiles have a human story. Every fiber had to pass through human hands. And some of those chapters are far more difficult than others. The history of cotton includes extraordinary craftsmanship, innovation, and trade. But it also includes exploitation, injustice, and suffering on a massive scale. Both of these things are true. And if we're going to understand cotton's place in history, we need to make room for both, because that history does matter. But as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, cotton's story continued to evolve. At this point, cotton was no longer a luxury or an exotic fiber arriving at ports from distant harbors. Cotton now was a part of everyday life. And perhaps no garment represents that more than the humble pair of blue jeans. In 1873, Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis patented a design combining sturdy cotton with metal parts to reinforce a pair of pants prone to wear and tear. It produced something that was durable and reliable and perfectly suited the demand for the very hard work. It started as workwear for miners, laborers, tradespeople, but it eventually became a staple in everyday wardrobe. It is now one of the most recognized garments on earth. Today, jeans are so common that it's hard to believe that they play such a part in cotton's extraordinary story. A story that began with ancient civilizations, crossed through with trade, helped to basically fuel the Industrial Revolution, and eventually found its way into the wardrobes of people all over the world. Throughout the 20th century, cotton continued to shift and adapt as manufacturing became increasingly globalized. Production moved away from many of the regions that had dominated earlier industrial textile manufacturing and expanded into countries with very strong agricultural industries, and basically implemented large-scale textile sectors. To this day, Cotton remains one of the most widely used natural fiber. Millions of tons are grown, processed, spun, woven, knitted, dyed, and sewn every year. And while cotton is cultivated in many countries, China and India remain one of the heaviest producers in the entire world. Currently, I think we can all finally agree that climate change is a thing, which means that after thousands of years of countless innovations and more than a few twists along the way, that fluffy little seed pod we met earlier is still one of humanity's favorite fibers. Not bad for a very ambitious little plant cell.